1 million people die per year due to not washing their hands.
Bacteria have their own ecosystems, their own environments that they thrive in. Take them out of that environment, then it can become very dangerous. Everything really is interconnected, and when mom eats, it automatically impacts how the fetus develops. The more stable, the more diverse and even your gut microbiome is, the faster your recovery is. We need to remember that the gut microbiome is a community. What certain bacteria are going to produce is actually food for others.
With things like Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, lupus, training or educating and equipping the patient with coping mechanisms that allow them to not only avoid the symptoms but treat the cause is critical. Welcome to the Diet Doctor podcast, where we discuss the science of nutrition and high performance, offering practical tools for everyday life. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another episode of Diet Doctor podcast. It's going to be a unique episode, a special episode about something that is very, very popular to talk about. It's all the rage at the moment, which is gut health. And I have with me a colleague of mine who I work closely with, Dr. Pauline Gorski, and all the way from the UAE, who has done her thesis most recently on this topic. And say no more. How are you, Pauline?
Hi, Moodi. I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for having me on your podcast. Real pleasure.
I just want to start, first of all, by how you ended up working in this field. How did you end up becoming a doctor of gut microbiota and genealogy and all the rest of it?
Okay, so there's quite a long story behind this, but I'll keep it short. I actually started my first degree in forensic biology, believe it or not. And that, well, over the 3 years of that first bachelor's degree, got me to discover the world of microbiology, which was fascinating and really got me thinking, you know what, these things can make or break you. So I pursued into this, went into a master's degree in bioinformatics, learned coding, research methodology, did 9 months research in different types of bacteria, or basically opportunistic pathogens, as we call it, the bat type of bacteria. And then I started a PhD in microbial genomics. So that means studying the DNA of microbes and using bioinformatics to do that. So basically computer-based biological analyses, right? And my thesis, the 4 years of research that I did throughout that PhD, was working with extremely premature babies that didn't have the best start in life, and looking at their gut microbiome. Since they can't feed properly or normally, we put nasogastric tube in them, and I was looking at the buildup of bacteria in there as well to see how it impacts the health of their gut and how it helps them basically fight and this early life that didn't really start great for them, and how it helps them develop a healthy immune system as they get older. So this is in a very short, very short way, but that's how I became a doctor in microbiome studies. And I've since then explored a wide variety of environments and different health and disease statuses that are linked to the gut microbiome.
That's super interesting, because you started off as an elite athlete, went into biology, and I know a lot of people will say science is science, but the sciences are very different. The sciences of physics and the sciences of biology and the sciences of chemistry are all very unique. What was interesting about your thesis is that it looked into newborn babies, it looked at infant mortality to a certain degree. Some of the research that I did at Sydney as well looked at infant mortality as well for postgraduate research, and its correlation with the caloric intake of the mothers. One of the recent studies that I looked into, that I was talking to you before we started, was the direct correlation and even a causal correlation between what the mother was consuming, both during pregnancy and during nursing the child, and how that impacts the child's ability to combat diseases, to potentially not grow up with autoimmune diseases, even the intelligence quotient that we mentioned about the study with regards to the IQ. Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, of course. I think we can sort of put a wider umbrella in this, which is everything is interconnected, right? Everything is linked together. And when we talk about a healthy pregnancy, a healthy infant, it always goes back also to the health of the mother. So if you're taking care of your body before you even get pregnant, and that's both for mom and dad, by the way, it's not only mom that has to do all the work there in staying healthy, but it's all about having a healthy gut or healthy gut microbiome, having a healthy balance of hormones, having a healthy inflammation status. Okay, we don't want to build this inflammation. That's not going to help in the conception, in the development, in the pregnancy, in the ease of delivery. So everything really is interconnected. And when mom eats, it automatically impacts how the fetus develops. Okay, so for example, when I started my PhD, there was still a debate in the research society in the field whether or not the womb is sterile. So you would think, okay, there are no bacteria, there are no microbes in the womb. It's supposed to be a sterile environment. Turns out it's not. So there's a lot of communication between the gut, the vaginal microbiome, the womb itself, the development of the fetus from the get-go, from conception to delivery, and of course when it comes to nursing. So everything that mom does, everything that dad does from the beginning is going to impact the quality of the pregnancy, is going to impact the quality of the milk if mom decides to breastfeed. And in that milk, you actually have bacteria too. And we're going to talk about those from a term and terminology that everybody knows, which is bifidobacteria. So bifidobacteria is present in the milk, and mum milk, breast milk, helps the baby's gut develop the right type of protection. It helps train our immune system from the beginning. It helps developing a strong digestive system. So from the beginning, it is absolutely crucial to really help the development of the baby as much as possible.
It's quite interesting because it's something that the relationship between nursing the child and the way that the mother is looking after herself. These things are heavily emphasized in the Islamic tradition. In the Islamic faith, we have, if the mother is fit and healthy, of course, a mandatory, or we would like to say mandatory, if it's possible, nursing period of 6 months, which is how long it takes for the immune system to be developed, and recommended 2 years for the IQ, for the intelligence quotient. And it was interesting that the study that was looking at the intelligence quotient and its how it is influenced by nursing showed that the IQ can go up as high as 1 point per month over 6 months. So from month 7 onwards, the IQ is going up by 1 point per month. And the study, it may be uncomfortable for people to get their head around. However, it included subjects that were as old as 16 and 17 years of age, but their IQ was so high that they were producing right then and there like future polymaths within the community. Delving into your passion for gut health and its impact on our day-to-day existence, is that what prompted you to develop an examination, a stool test that is able to look at the stomach from both a quantitative and qualitative perspective, with a little bit more efficacy than other examinations that came prior to it?
Yes, it did. Absolutely. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about passionate, and I am very passionate about this field. It really is something that I talk about whenever I get the chance, from a variety of perspectives. And it was something that I could see was not readily available in the market. So it's very difficult to find a test that will give you in-depth information, and that is interpreted in an easy way. So I do like to work with professionals directly, such as yourself, because we do want to make sure that the message is always captured and translated back to each person correctly. but it's still something that can be understood by everybody. And our tests are doing just that. So we are making sure that we're providing the type of technology that not only will look at small details within a sample, but we're looking at the whole thing, the whole picture. And to give you a bit of an idea, there are different technologies that are utilized to look at the gut microbiome. So maybe if we just take a small step back in understanding what does the gut microbiome actually mean, it means that within our gut, and when I say gut, I'm using a very broad language here because the gut really refers to stomach, small intestine, large intestine, and everything all in, and around it, right? And all of these have their own microbiome. But when we look at it from a bulk picture, from a broader picture, we're taking that one sample, which is a stool sample, and we're looking at what's inside. And from that sample, we can identify all types of microbes. We're talking bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, all of it, and including some of your own cells, some of your own body cells. So the majority of tests out there are going to look at a specific gene that is only found in bacteria, but in all bacteria. So so now everybody I think is familiar with the terminology PCR, thanks to COVID, I guess. So you just select that very gene, you look at it, and then you can tell which bacteria it belongs to. But the way we're looking at this is we're essentially capturing all of the genes from all of these microbes. Okay, so we can actually say not only what they are, who they are, what category they fall in, bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, but we can also look at their functionality. So, what is it that they can do? What is it that they can digest? What is it that they can produce? How do they behave with each other? So, this gives us a very, very large picture, very comprehensive perspective, and a much better understanding as to right now from this sample, what is our gut doing, or what is the community of microbes in our gut doing? So, this is what we can provide. And the way we look at it is okay, these are all the bacteria that you have. Maybe you have a bit too much of this. Maybe you don't have enough of that. Maybe you have an overgrowth of a certain fungi. Maybe you have not enough vitamin B production potential in your gut. Maybe you're not producing enough short chain fatty acids, which are actually protecting your gut, which are keeping your gut healthy from stopping the bad bacteria from overgrowing, for example. So this is in how much depth we can go into with those tests. And because that was just not available in the market, we needed to be able to provide this to the wider community. And the more we talk about it, the more awareness we create, the more we can make this available to everybody.
Well, not only is it different, but it's very, very diverse with regards to the results and how easy it is to look at. And for those that don't know, Dr. Pauline and I collaborated on this particular examination, this gut examination, both in Australia and in the UAE, to really provide the individual, in layman's terms somewhat, really a picture of what's going on inside the stomach. But the comprehensive picture that is painted is 12 pages long, right? And one of the patients that I was with yesterday, and I was discussing some of the results here, and I'll go through some of them one by one. These are the key findings that I shared with her after looking at her results. And the first one, and just so we can inform the listeners as to what this language means, so they don't feel like they're left out of the conversation. The first one was that the report indicated a healthy microbiome with a good Shannon diversity index of 3.0. We would have liked that to be higher, but that particular variable tells us about the diversity of the bacteria in the stomach. So it's not just gut bacteria from a quantitative perspective, but the quality and the diversity of the gut bacteria that matters. What roles does quantity play, and what roles does quality and diversity play in gut microbiota to somebody's health?
So the way to think about it is, like everything else in life that we tend to say, everything is good in moderation, right? Everything is good in the right balance. And I think that goes, the best way to look at it is probably the hormonal balance, right? When everything is in balance, even if there's a spike somewhere, it's not going to create a massive disruption. And this is the same when it comes to the gut microbiome. And here we're talking about millions and billions of microbes in the gut, right? And we want to make sure that this is as diverse, so in the sense that there are as many species as possible, and it is also as even as possible. So we don't want one species of microbe to overtake the rest. So you want them to sort of be, in a sort of a nice balance, numbers as well as wide diversity as possible. But why is that? It's because this stability is what's going to help you recover faster when you have either a type of food that just doesn't agree, or whether you get a cold, or you get a virus, or you get a disease, or whether you're all of a sudden suffering from, I don't know, any kind of other kind of acute or chronic conditions that you may face, and we all do, okay, throughout their life we all will, or whether you have an injury, or whether maybe if you're an elite athlete, and you have a strong if you have a competition day or a competition week, then your body is actually going to take quite a hit. So the more stable, the more diverse and even your gut microbiome is, the faster your recovery is, because it will be in that status where it's like, okay, we've taken a hit, but we can actually bring it back to its sort of healthy status. So this is the importance of Shannon index diversity.
Okay, so it's the body's ability to bounce back after experiencing or enduring some sort of a hardship or unexpected a variable that the body is subjected to, whether it's just like with blood tests though. With blood tests, you see that white blood cell count can sometimes be lower than usual or higher than usual, depending on whether the body is combating some sort of a disease, right? So to increase in white blood cells to be able to be capable of doing that. The other interesting variable that I was looking at when talking to this patient was the DNA, the host DNA. The host DNA and its correlation with the gut lining and how intact or not intact the gut lining is. Can you elaborate just a little bit about that particular variable?
Of course. And that goes back to the ability of this test that we do to look at absolutely everything. So when we get the sample, which is a stool sample, we're talking about waste, about fecal matter. And that will include a variety of components. So obviously all of the microbes, some food that was undigested, but also some cells that belong to us. And where do these cells come from? They're going to come through the digestive tract, right? So from where your food came in to where it comes out, and it will have some cells inside. But that number is very important, because when you have a healthy gut, your epithelial layer, or the layer inside the gut lining, is protected by a variety of things. We have a mucus layer. We have all of this bacteria that's making sure that this mucus layer stays intact. So there is no disruption with the cells of your gut, of your intestine, and that nothing goes through to your blood vessels. If this is damaged, and this can be damaged by a variety of things. We're talking about inflammation that can lead to leaky gut syndrome. We can talk about IBS, IBD, Crohn's disease, autoimmune diseases. All of this will impact this layer. And we can identify whether this has been impacted because those cells are going to be disrupted, and they're going to be actually breaking off and go into our stool. So when we analyze this sample, if there is a high number or high abundance or high percentage of DNA that belongs to us, without looking at the DNA itself, we know whether it's human or if it is bacterial or microbial. If this is a high number, we know that there's been a lot of cells that were shed in the sample. And that tells us that there is something that is wrong with the gut lining integrity. So this is how we can tell whether there's something that's actually impacting physiologically the gut lining.
It's interesting because in a world where the industry is being served by the health industry, so the health industry serves industry, doesn't serve humanity. And it shows when specialists and some gastroenterologists, not all of them, will lean or rely heavily on medication. Now, I know that sometimes is something that is unavoidable with things like Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, lupus. However, training or educating and equipping the patient with coping mechanisms that allow them to not only avoid the symptoms but treat the cause is critical. And one of the variables I was looking at when it came to the results for this particular patient was the beneficial microbes and how much as a percentage were beneficial microbes. However, if there's an overabundance of even a beneficial microbe, that can also be an issue. And can you give me an example about that?
Yes, of course. And I think this is where we can start using the terminology such as dysbiosis. And dysbiosis is, so we tend to annotate it as a bad thing, right? But it is actually just meaning imbalance in something. And dysbiosis, as we talked about earlier, the importance of the Shannon index or the diversity and evenness, if there is one microbe that just overtakes this abundance within the gut microbiome as a community, it doesn't matter whether it's a good or bad microbe. It doesn't matter if it's a bad microbe in the sense that we can identify whether it's an acute or chronic infection that needs treating. But if in the same manner you have a good microbe that's overtaking, then we also have an issue in that balance, right? And this is something that they could start producing too much of something that we don't really want, and we just want them to bring back down to that general level. So in the same way, there is no such thing as 100% good or 100% bad microbes. They're not there thinking, I'm going to cause a lot of bad things here today or a lot of good things here today. They all have their own agenda, which is survive and make sure they keep surviving and multiplying, right? But we are the ones that require them to be at a certain level. So no matter whether it's a good or bad bacteria, we don't want them to be that high. It means there's something wrong somewhere, and we need to just bring it back down to that level. And it could just be bringing the rest of them up a little bit so that this one can't grow quite as much. So sometimes it's as simple as that.
That's interesting. The variables that we're able to look at with the results of this study is nothing short of profound. But some of the other things that stood out to me, or one of the other things that stood out to me, is something that I preach to all my patients, which is eat your fermented products, have your fermented beverage every day, have a fermented dairy product every day, the carnivore dieters are going to hate me for this, but have a rainbow of foods, fruits, vegetables, a fermented vegetable as well, fermented vegetables for their ability to increase the probiotic species within the stomach. Now, that's something that you recommend we recommend with the action plan that is given to the patient. But we're even able to look at the probiotic species and whether that's low or high, and whether that needs to be addressed, which is quite unique. The short chain fatty acid production is something that I don't think many health professionals speak, or I have never heard any health professional really discuss short chain fatty acid production and its impact on our health. Can you elaborate just a little bit on that for us?
Yeah, of course, and you're right that it's not spoken of enough, and I think this is a very important component of gut health in general, and this is something that if you start digging a little bit further into gut health, is always going to pop back up. And we're talking about three top short chain fatty acids. There are more than that, but the three top ones, which are going to be butyrate, acetate, and propionate, and these are generally going to be some of the major components that are produced by the gut microbiota. And these components actually protect the gut and are involved in a wide variety of biological processes. We're talking from immunity modulation. We're talking about being able to help the gut keep its integrity. We're talking about communication means, and we're talking about creating food, because short chain fatty acids are also food for other beneficial bacteria. So it's a very important component of the gut microbiome as an ecosystem, because we need to remember that the gut microbiome is a community. What certain bacteria are going to produce is actually food for others. And that keeps going on and on and on. So we feed them fiber, which is their primary food component, and these are in the form of prebiotics. And then they start producing all of these things that we require, and at the same time produce the food for other bacteria. And sometimes what's going to happen is they also are able to produce other components that will kill off the bad bacteria. So this is where the importance of short chain fatty acids come in. And if you don't produce enough of them, if you don't have enough bacteria, whether in terms of quality or quantity, to produce those, then it'll be very difficult to keep a healthy gut microbiome as a community as a whole. And it's not just about feeding them a direct component, such as a supplement. And I always say supplements are great. They all have their own benefits in different ways. But if you can always find a way of getting these components in their natural form, whether they are in food form, whether they are in fermented products form, always go with that first option. Then, if you need supplementation, take it, but it's never going to make it as readily available or as readily bioavailable for your gut bacteria, for your gut microbes, as it should be, as if you consume it in its raw form.
Yeah, so there's no supplement that can do what a fermented beverage like apple cider can do. There's no supplement that can do what a fermented vegetable like pickles, sauerkraut, and kimchi can do. There's no supplement that can do what, fermented dairy products can do, such as kefir and goat's milk yogurt, which are generally low in lactose anyway. What I've noticed that is a common theme, and maybe you can elaborate as to why this is happening. But the supplement recommendation is depending on whether Dr. Pauline's pronouncing or myself, it's either butyrate or butyrate. But why is that such a common problem? What are we doing from a diet perspective that is not allowing us to have enough butyrate so that we need to supplement with this sort of thing? Because at the end of the day, you did say that the gut is an ecosystem, and we have to think of eating not just to feed ourselves, but to feed the soldiers that are working in our gut, that are either fighting to defend us from an overabundance of bad bacteria. All these soldiers, and these soldiers need fuel themselves to be able to function. So you're feeding the good bacteria to allow them to function and do their thing, and one of those things is to fight off bad bacteria. But what are we doing wrong when it comes to the way we eat that is seeing a trend in a recommendation for butyrate supplementation?
So I think there's an easy answer to this, technically speaking, which is fiber. And I think what's happened over the years, over the decades, our cultures have completely forgotten what it is to eat and to actually eat consciously. Okay, so we know what we're eating. Right now, we're exposed to all of these additives, all of these emulsifiers, processed foods, all of this, which are actually nutrient empty. Right, we're gonna be able to ingest things that do not contain the nutrients that our body requires. So we think we're full, we keep eating, it's satisfying, but you're not actually consuming the things that your body needs. And all of this really goes back to fiber. There's obviously a lot of other things that need to be considered when it comes to vitamins, minerals, and all of this. But fiber is that source, that food that feeds our gut microbiome. And we tend to forget what it is that we're eating, right? We're not curious about what we're eating anymore. We're not taking the time to understand how and what we're eating. So, for example, we'll look at, apples. The apple skin contains a very high level of inulin, okay, which is a type of prebiotic, a type of fiber that is very important for the growth of our gut microbiome. We need to eat the skins of our fruits and vegetables. We are faced with an issue now, which is, okay, but what about pesticides and what about X, Y, Z? But everything should come one at a time. Let's start first to try and find those raw foods. Let's try to keep eating them whole. Let's try to really dilute on that whole processed perspective. Okay, let's just try to bring everything as whole as we can, because these contain fibers. So if somebody tells you, have a glass of orange juice high in vitamin C, great, it is high in vitamin C, but make sure there's no added sugar, and also make sure there's pulp, because that pulp will contain the fiber. So it's actually much better ultimately if you just buy an orange and you just peel that orange, you enjoy the process, enjoy that smell, and eat all of that fiber that comes with it. Eat an apple, wash it, but eat the skin. That's so important. So all of this comes back to these details, and everything that we do tend to add to our action plan says, bring this fiber up. If you cannot do it from a food perspective, get a few prebiotics. There are some available as supplements, not the best, but an alternative. And also always make sure that you introduce an average, or if you can more than 30 vegetables, fruits, seeds, and nuts a week, because in their whole forms, because this will provide you with this diversity of fiber. We talk about diversity and evenness, but that also goes into the consumption of our food. You want it to be as diverse as possible. You want all those polyphenols. You want all of these different fibers, all these different vitamins and minerals that you get from this food that you eat. And I think that goes back to just creating a bit more need for curiosity in what we eat, and not just stuffing ourselves, but actually be interested about what we eat.
Now I'm craving the organic apples and kiwi fruit and mandarins that I have sitting in my car. I should have brought them down. But I love the fact that you've touched on the very important aspect of eating the skin of fruits where applicable. I'm not asking you to eat a banana skin, and I don't think Dr. Pauline is asking you
I
to do
eat
that either.
kiwi skin, by the way.
Kiwi skin, yeah, I'd never chuck away the kiwi skin. So I actually put these into perspective when I'm talking to the patient. So I'll say kiwi skin, right? 2/3 of the nutrients and the vitamin C and the antioxidants and the phytonutrients, they lie in the skin. Why would you throw that out? When you're eating an orange or a mandarin, don't over peel that white fleshy bit, that pith, because it's got the hydroxy citric acid. It's got all the things that help with your digestion, but also help metabolic health as well, because the metabolism is directly influenced by your gut health. You can have metabolic syndrome as a result of poor gut health. And I've seen that with some of the results that we've looked at for some of the patients that we have. And even apple skin, you mentioned apple skin. Apple skin, yes, it's rich in inulin, which is very important for your gut health. However, it's also rich in something called usilic acid, which supplement companies are now capitalizing onto as a fat-burning ingredient. I predicted this over 10 years ago when I was working with some of the supplement companies in the United States, such as GNC. And I said, one day usilic acid is going to be a standalone supplement, as is CLA, conjugated linoleic acid. These things are very, very important. And when you ask somebody, like you said, 30 foods, different fruits and vegetables, somebody might look at that or read that in their action plan and get, a panic attack. However, we don't hesitate to diversify our bad food intake. And a lot of people think that eating clean is it has to incorporate a restrictive mentality. I asked people to do an exercise where you would get 2 pieces of paper, and on one piece of paper, let's say you write all the bad foods that you like to eat. And then on the other paper, write a list of all the good foods that you haven't eaten in the last 12 months, one by one, every fruit, every vegetable. The list that you'll be left with that has all the foods that you have not made an effort to consume will always be far greater, in my opinion. And you can try this exercise at home. Now, one of the things that also stood out was, and I'll address these one at a time, the herbs and spices. People think that food has to be bland. And here we are in the action plan telling people to increase their herb and spice intake. What's the benefit of that?
So there's a massive benefit. And I think we tend to forget with all of this readily available food deliveries, readily this, readily that, we don't even know what are all of the condiments, all of the herbs, all of the flavors that are added to our food, right? We forget this because the majority of people nowadays don't cook at home. So they don't know what it is to actually think about adding those flavors in. And when we talk about these, we talk about garlic, all those different types of herbs, all those different oils, and they contain such beneficial components for our gut microbiome. All of these oils that come from those very fragrant spices, oregano, coriander, all of these have a huge impact on helping our gut microbiome basically build a strong immune system in itself. It helps them be able to make sure that we're stopping those bad bacteria growing, to help them acquire all of the right tools to be able to produce the secondary metabolites that actually protect us, if anything. So these are very important as well. And there is not just the whole component of, okay, let's just add this for the purpose of nourishing my gut microbiome, but it's also about the satisfaction that you take when you eat. There's a massive unspoken importance in ensuring that what you do is conscious, what you eat is conscious. When you cook, think about what you're going to eat. Think about appreciating these things, because that's something that we haven't really touched on yet, but there is a whole connection that goes from the gut to the brain, the gut brain axis. Mental, cerebral satisfaction has a massive impact on your gut. And obviously, number one, the components themselves are going to be very important for your gut health. But the satisfaction that you take in eating them, knowing that you've cooked it, knowing what's inside, consciously satisfied with your food, is massively important. So they have this sort of dual importance there.
So the physiological systems that are in our body are not separate entities. That there's you don't ha- we are not a cardiovascular system that is operating separately to a gastrointestinal system that is operating separately to a central nervous system. They're all intertwined, and the brain has neurons, the stomach has neurons, but there are more of them in your stomach than there are in your brain. Those very same neurons also exist in your heart, and there are more of them in your heart than there are in your brain. So this concept of thinking with our brain really has to go out the window, because we quite literally think with every iota of our physiology. What's one thing you touched on was home cooked food, and that's what I encourage people to consume if they're going to consume meal prepped food. And this is not a shameless plug for my company, but it's home cooked food. If you're going to cook a home cooked meal, let's say you don't, you're the type of person that does meal preps. A home cooked meal is not the same as having the same ingredients, but with all the additives and the preservatives and the emulsifiers. And there was a unique study that was, and this is something that is done on gastroenterology patients, the camera, the size of a capsule that is swallowed, and it's recording everything that's going on in the stomach from A to Z. And there were two subjects. One of them, this is the 2-minute noodle study that I like, that's what I like to call it. There was one subject that, there was two subjects, sorry. One of them was eating the same 2-minute noodles that is in a package, however, they were home-cooked version. And that home-cooked version consisted of the same ingredients, which is wheat, flour, and salt, but without the additives and the preservatives and all the nasties. The person that had the 2-minute noodles with all the additives and the preservatives, because you have to have a shelf life of 2 years sometimes for them to go into grocery, that person also happened to have a blue Gatorade drink with their noodles. Now, the camera showed the person who had consumed the homemade version of the noodles that there were no trace elements left of those noodles after 40 minutes. However, the individual that had the packaged version, 4 hours later, those noodles were still in shards. They had teeth marks on them, so they hadn't been digested. And they were dyed blue because the blue coloring comes from petroleum, and we cannot digest petroleum. Now, the other benefit of when you eat a home cooked meal versus fast food, I give the analogy of the burger. A home cooked burger with quality ingredients, right, can have 500 calories, whereas a fast food burger can also have 500 calories. And it's not just calories in, calories out because of the thermic effect. Now, if it's predominantly manufactured food and heavily processed food, there's no digestive effort on behalf of the stomach to digest and break that food down. Whereas a home-cooked burger that has 500 calories, instead of only requiring 3 to 9 calories to digest, because if you've got 500 calories of processed burger and you're only requiring, let's not say 3, let's say 9, let's be optimistic, you're left with 491 calories as a net figure. Whereas if you have a home-cooked burger, the stomach may expend 100 to 150 calories to digest that 500 calories, and the net total is far less. It's 350, it's 400, but it's significantly less. And if you do that meal in, meal out over a weekly basis, the impact is profound. Now, how important is it to not just feed the gut bacteria that is in your stomach, but to exercise the gut itself with whole foods?
This is very important in the sense that something we haven't quite discussed in terms of the details of what the gut bacteria do, or gut microbes as a whole, is they all have a specific, say, job to do, right? So when we look at, and you'll see some of those as metrics also on the gut microbiome profile reports, what we call, for example, Firmicutes and Bacteroidetes, or Prevotella and Bacteroides. So this might sound very alien, I know, but it actually will make sense in a second. So we can categorize bacteria in a certain hierarchy, in a certain taxonomic group. And we look at them, for those specific ones that I just mentioned, as ratios. And why are we looking at them, and why are we looking at them in the concept of health and disease? Is because some groups of bacteria are going to be kind of food hoarders. So they're going to be the types of bacteria that will want to harvest as much energy as possible from the food to keep it in the body, store it as fat, for example. Whilst others are going to want to just utilize it just as much as they need, just to produce the right things and let it move on. And this is where we start talking about this kind of food storage, fat storage, food harvesting, and the development of metabolic diseases. And we include within this, we include obesity, we include type 2 diabetes, we include metabolic syndrome. And this is where the importance of ensuring that diversity, that sort of Shannon index abundance stays very even, because we want to make sure that this bacteria is not over processing, overtaking all of this food energy, over storing, and this has to do all of it to do with what you consume. So when you have this whole food, this raw food, the bacteria, they're going to say, okay, I'll take just what I need in order to produce the things that this body requires, and then let it go, are going to be the bacteria that will require this whole food and this raw food. But then if you start taking all of this processed, takes an awfully long time to stay in your body, all of these bacteria that will say, okay, let me harvest as much as possible from this, let me store it as fat, are going to love this kind of food. So here we're talking about a direct impact on saying, okay, if I'm feeding all of the right stuff, then the good bacteria will know exactly what to do. And they won't let that bacteria that will store all of this fat, that will store all of this excess energy in my body take over. So it really has a direct impact in that sense. And this is where we are starting to show these metrics from a ratio perspective. So the Firmicutes to Bacteroides ratio, for example, if it's too high, if there are too many Firmicutes, these are going to be the type of bacteria that will keep harvesting energy from all this food and keep storing it in the body. And this can lead to obesity and other metabolic syndromes. And if we look at another type of ratio, which is Prevotella and Bacteroides, which both belong to the categories of Bacteroidetes that we talked about in the previous ratio, this will tell you, for example, if you have more Prevotella or the ratio is higher in Prevotella, it will tell you that actually you have a food that is very high in fiber, high in natural whole foods, raw foods, because they help to build up that particular community of bacteria better. So this gives you a bit of a snapshot into, okay, what does the status of my gut microbiome look like? And you will often be able to relate it back to what the person eats. So there is this direct link, and it is definitely impacted by the quality of the food that you eat, not just necessarily the calories.
Yeah, it's not just calories in, calories out. There's even peer pressure, you say, taking place inside the stomach. So there's peer pressure. You've got bacteria that is bad for you, that is peer pressuring the good bacteria, and so on and so forth. It really is an ecosystem within itself.
It is.
One of the things that you touch on, which is something that I like to highlight, is our ability to reduce disruptive microbes in the stomach by doing things as simple as washing your hands. And I think I was talking about this, especially during COVID, when everybody was very pedantic and anal about washing their hands, and not so much anymore. But it is a very, very important practice. 1 million people die per year due to not washing their hands. What impact does an exercise, or how important is it to teach our kids to do something as basic as washing their hands in protecting their gut health?
So this is particularly important when we're talking about food contamination. So actually, come to think of it, it's very interesting, because the first time that I got to look into this topic and learn about this was in forensic biology. And part of my first degree in forensic biology was forensic microbiology, where we investigate foodborne outbreaks. And these will come, I mean, everybody must have heard about the E. coli outbreak back, I think, in 2014, was it, that unfortunately killed a lot of people. A lot of people got infected, had some very nasty symptoms and outcomes. But this is crucial when it comes to ensuring that we're not contaminating foods or surfaces. So to give a bit of a broader perspective, bacteria specifically, because generally these are going to be from bacteria. Bacteria have their own ecosystems, their own environments that they thrive in. Take them out of that environment, then it can become very dangerous. And we're talking about, as an example, E. coli. E. coli is a natural resident of our gut in low numbers and specific strains as well. It's also a natural resident of cow gut. So when it comes out of that environment, through cow stool, for example, and it's on our hands, and we start touching food, and food contains a lot of beautiful nutrients for these bacteria to grow, and they're going to keep growing in that food, and you ingest that food, and you haven't washed your hands in between, so you were the one to contaminate it in the first place. You ingest it, had time to grow in that food because it had all of the right environment, all of the right nutrients to do this. You're introducing into your gut microbiome a massive amount of this bacteria that is not a natural resident of your gut. And it finds itself in a very nice environment at a beautiful 37 degrees Celsius.
Perfect temperature.
Exactly, with a lot of nutrients to keep growing. So imagine if your gut microbiome is in dysbiosis, which means that it's imbalance, it's going to be residing in there quite happily and keep growing and causing very bad symptoms. So we're talking all sorts of gastrointestinal symptoms that can actually develop into much bigger complications. So this is a small example. Another example is going to be like poultry. So you may not have heard of this bacteria, but it's called Campylobacter, and it's a natural resident of poultry intestine. And this can cause campylobacterosis, which is actually a nasty infection. And this is why people are so afraid of eating raw chicken. It comes from this particular bacteria and the kind of nasty symptoms it causes when you have an infection. So people go and wash their poultry, which never do, by the way. But what happens is, handle your poultry, wash your hands, cook it, it'll kill the bacteria, eat it safely, you're good to go. So it's all about ensuring that there isn't this cross-contamination going everywhere. So just a simple case of hand washing, not overwashing, because then you're killing all of the natural protection and barriers that you have. But hand washing between touching certain things that are raw or cooked, or that you're going to be ingesting your food with dirty hands, is a massive awareness, detail to really put out there. So it is the sort of little things that you start early in education. And this is why everybody says, have you washed your hands before you eat? It's just those little things that we forget where they come from. But ultimately, it's just to avoid having all of this potential issues that are all avoidable. It's all about making sure your food, once it's been cooked or prepared, is in the fridge. So you don't want to leave it outside at a temperature where bacteria are going to keep growing in this food, and then you're going to ingest it and it's going to cause an issue. And then it takes us back into that kind of circle where we say, well, if you have a healthy gut microbiota and you do by mistake ingest these overgrown organisms, dirty surfaces, or food that grew some...
the self-defense mechanisms will be there.
Your defense mechanism will be there and you won't have those symptoms. And it all goes back to immunity. We talk about immunity, but really immunity and gut health are quite interlinked. So if you're in dysbiosis,
they're intertwined.
Bad. Exactly. So it all really is going hand in hand.
It's so interesting. So interesting that you mentioned not overwashing, because in the Islamic tradition, and I did looked at this research when I was writing my book that is in publishing as we speak, about eating with your hands not being a primitive activity. If your hands are washed, there are still some flora on the fingertips that when making contact with the food, not only are you gauging the size of the mouthful and making the journey between the brain and the stomach in digestion quite simpler for the stomach to endure, but you are also activating the nutrients in the food to a certain degree once you make contact with them with your fingers. So that's it's an interesting piece of study that I came across when I was looking at this book that is hopefully out of publishing soon and available. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Pauline. And if anyone is interested in getting a complete summary and an action plan and getting a picture painted for them as to what's going on in their stomach, you can go to moodi.dennaoui.com, look at the gut microbiome exam, and it's an FRX exam, and your stool sample will travel internationally to the United States and go through quantitative and qualitative analysis, and a very broad, comprehensive picture will be painted for you with regards to what's going on in your stomach and how you can improve it, because a good stomach, good gut health means a happier, healthy you. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Pauline. This will hopefully be one of many segments, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Moodi.